Welcome, believers, and welcome to the wonderfully weird world of the Tinfoil Hat Fan Club. On today's episode, I want to talk about Westall 1966 incident. Okay, now this one's a great incident. 300 witnesses, teachers, school kids. The army was involved, the police were involved. There was a cover up that I always love. So stay tuned and I'll tell you all about it. Okay, well, the Westall 1966 incident is probably one of the best sightings on record. It all starts Wednesday, the April the 6th in 1966. With the school term just about to finish, there were two groups of school kids doing PE on the playing field, right? One of the teachers, a Miss Jeanette Muir from New Zealand, was probably the first adult to notice the object, because she was alerted by the cries and shrieks of her students. Now, as the object made no sound because it was silent, by the time it was spotted, it was right over her head. For several minutes, about 50 Form 1 and Form 3 students and their teachers watched as this silver, shiny, metallic-looking object, roughly about the size of two cars and shaped like an upside-down bowl, flew over their heads. Now, okay, the size of two cars and shaped like an upside-down bowl flew over their heads. Remember that because apparently this was a balloon. A balloon, right. Okay, so it flew very low as the tops of nearby trees and the football goalposts. In fact, many students thought it was going to land. Some students reacted with panic, while many become distraught because, mate, this is during a school day and it's a very unusual thing to happen. Now, Miss Muir and another male teacher attempted to gather the students and get them back into the safety of their classrooms. The sight of this strange craft was overwhelming for many. It appeared seemingly out of nowhere and seemed to fly under intelligent control, like it had a pilot inside. Mystifying those watching as this clearly was not a plane or a balloon, right? There was no visible windows, no visible markings, no letters, numbers, no insignias, no ropes, no visible engine or propellers, and no wings or fins. Its shape was very clear and its lack of sound was very clear. But to many it was obvious that this craft was flying and not floating. Okay, as I say, it's important because we are being told this was a balloon. For some, there was something else noticeable. The craft was not alone. In the distance, there appeared to be another two flying saucers, further up in the sky and keeping their distance. By this stage, one form student had run back into the school and had burst into the science room, taught by Mr. Andrew Greenwood, shouting, "There's a flying saucer! There's a flying saucer!" Of course, all the students were now looking out the window when the recess bell sounded. So, Mr. Greenwood, with students in tow, went to have a look for himself. When this student was on her way to interrupt Mr. Greenwood's class, she did pass another student who was standing nearby. This girl had a sick note excusing her from PE, but was watching from the sidelines. She had watched in amazement as she saw this object first appear and then silently fly in, and is sure that one of them had landed in the grassy paddock next to the school. So later classmates would lead her to where she thought the craft had landed so she could see the marks that had been left there where the flying saucer had touched down. So obviously it did touch down. So what she thought touched down did actually touch down. Now, word of the visiting strange silver crafts had spread through the school. Andrew Greenwood, the science teacher, whose class got interrupted, was now outside the school and was just in time to see the flying saucer move away from the school, where it hovered over a property called the Grange. Now, the Grange is approximately 400 metres away from the school. Now, to the amazement of everyone watching, the larger or closer craft started to flitter from one side to the other. It ascended and descended and then turned at an incredible speed. Remember, this is meant to be a balloon. All the time this was going on, 5 planes, small planes, were heading towards the UFO's position. But every time the planes got close, the UFO would flitter off. Like this UFO was playing cat and mouse with the planes. By this stage, about 300 students were outside the school, many climbing the high wooden fence on the school's western boundary, and the wire fence at the foot of 2 high-voltage pylons that stood in the school's southwestern corner, where the craft had flown over when heading for the Grange. Now remember, this is really weird. I mean, you're at a school, and you've got 3 unidentified flying objects flittering in the sky. I mean, to keep the calm would be literally impossible. At the sight of the craft flying over the pine trees and heading towards the Grange, a group of children jumped the fence and chased the UFO. Remember, they're trying to tell us this was a government balloon, okay? The cries of a few teachers shouted to return to the school fell mostly on deaf ears as a dozen of students ran up dirt tracks and paddocks chasing the UFO. Now, a lucky few had reached the site before the hordes of kids turned up. One Form 1 witness remembers arriving in time to see the craft lifting off from where it had settled or perhaps had been hovering. On the ground were 2 girls, one had fainted and the other looked dazed and confused. So I know that one of these girls, I think it was the one who looked dazed and confused, she was taken away in an ambulance and was never seen again. Okay, so maybe the incident freaked her out so badly that she just didn't want to go back to school, but she never did return. While she was taking all this in, the UFO ascended, turned on its side, and then flew up and away at a great rate, vanishing from view. Turning on its side. Now, anyone who's into the UFO scene knows of Bob Lazar. Bob Lazar is responsible for exposing Area 51. He's responsible, and he always said that the craft, the way it's designed, is they filter like that and then they go on their side and they take off like that. So it's just interesting that that witness said that's how it flew. Now, it appears that the flying saucer was on or near a ground beyond the trees for only a few minutes. More and more students arrived at the scene only to find the craft had gone. Those who stayed at the school was able to watch the craft ascend and fly away. Those at the school were able to attest to the incredible speed that the craft departed, as if in a blink of an eye, and they were gone. For those brave enough to venture towards the Grange, what they found was a perfectly round area of flattened grass, with the stalks of grass swirled around in one direction, with a distinct ring of discoloured grass around the perimeter. Many recall the perimeter seeming singed or scorched. Right, for those who arrived and witnessed the burnt discoloured circle, there could be no mistake that the UFO was the cause of the singed ring. Although teachers and prefects soon arrived on the scene to haul the students back to safety, they too become witnesses. One of them, a woodwork teacher, was called Mr. Jerry Shepherd, who found it difficult to believe they had seen a UFO. Still, he could not deny the sudden and unprecedented appearance of this singed ring in an area that he knew like the back of his hand. The school uses the Grange for its cross-country running, and locals alike used it for a manner of other activities. In the 2 decades that Mr. Shepherd had taught at the school, he had never seen such a perfectly formed circle in his whole life. And remember, it was singed and burnt. After all this excitement, the headmaster, Mr. Sambleby, and his staff tried to wrestle control over the school, as of course that was their duty. At the school's assembly called after the students had returned to school, he made it clear that UFOs didn't exist, and they had seen nothing of importance, and they were not to speak about the incident to anyone. Most importantly, they were not to speak to the media or the papers. Some students recall seeing 2 men at assembly that looked like they were from the government. Some students were to have a close encounter with these men in Sambleby's office over the following hours, and they were left in no doubt that they were to put a lid on things. They weren't allowed to say anything. Over the coming hours that day, especially after school, family and students made their way down to the Grange to see the strange round markings imprinted in the grass. A firefighter named Albie from nearby Springvale was dispatched that day in response to reports of something coming down amongst the trees at the Grange. A bunch of emergency services had also been dispatched that day. David, the Deputy Controller of the Civil Service Organisation, had also had reports of something crashing in the Grange, or at least getting in trouble. Right, but by the time they reached the Grange, both emergency services, both were too late to see any craft because it had already taken off. But they were in time to see the melee happening in and around the Grange. Both emergency crews returned to their stations with many unanswered questions. Both emergency services only had a brief idea of where they were going, but it seemed the police and the military, who had already arrived, knew exactly where to go. 24 witnesses re-encountered memories of people and all military in uniforms, some say army, some say air force, probably both, coming to the school or to the site of the Singed Circle at the Grange. Some recall military vehicles and crew arriving within 20 minutes of the first sighting. Another witness recalls about 20 soldiers in khaki uniforms turning up in jeeps and trucks with a camouflage tarpaulin. Another witness remembers taking cover behind some pine trees and spots 4 military soldiers examining the circle with special equipment and those radioactive Geiger counters. Okay, that's what he reckons. One electrical engineer student at a nearby university rode down to meet his uncle, who showed him the circle. But the next day, when he returned, he found the circle barricaded off and soldiers on point duty, so they weren't allowed to enter it. 2 boys who were later to become police officers clearly recall seeing 2 types of uniform present around the school on the day. Some were police officers, some were military. They were both working alongside each other. Now, fortunately, the military and police emergency service wasn't the only ones to turn up that day. By the afternoon, newspapers and TV stations had turned up outside the school gate. Some had obviously phoned the local rag and the TV station to tell them about it. Several of the students had managed to give their version of events before police and teachers had hustled them back inside. The story, including the interrupted interviews, aired that night on Melbourne TV News. The local paper managed to interview Mr. Greenwood, the science teacher, and 2 Form 2 students. Both teachers and students were severely reprimanded by the headmaster for having the audacity to speak to the press. The story ran for 2 weeks and remains an important document of the event. Strangely though, and this is where it gets a bit weird, even though the photographer is sure he took photos, they were not part of the article published. Also, Channel 9, the TV station that aired the documentary, has not been able to find the archives or locate the original story that aired that night. The film's gone missing. Investigators from the Victorian Flying Saucer Research Society arrived 2 days later, but the school was closed. They did manage to speak to a few witnesses and take photos of the circle, but the society cannot locate any of the photos or the notes taken on the day. They've gone missing. Right, Andrew Goodwood has always stood by his story. He's the science teacher. And he thinks many more teachers have witnessed the event but was too scared to talk. Remember, they were being silenced. Right, breaking a forced 55-year-old silence, Andrew Goodwood, remember he was the science teacher, has revealed what he saw that day and how he was threatened by the Australian military officials and even contacted by the US president at the time. And I believe he was also threatened with, they said, look, you've obviously been drinking at work. So, you know, I think if he'd have carried on telling what he was telling them on the day, that he'd have got sacked for drinking and then probably not been able to work again. That is the power that the Australian government have, I suppose. Now, one teacher had the camera taken away. So she took photos, but it was confiscated. So what do you think? What do you think? I mean, confiscating cameras, threatening teachers, cover-ups, silences, officials turning up at the school, making sure the kids don't say anything. Do you think this is a balloon or do you think it's a UFO? Okay, now what I would suggest you do is have a look. Check out the Westall 1966 story. There is even a film about it. Now, I believe on the day back in 1966, hundreds of students and a few handful of teachers saw a genuine flying saucer hovering over the school. That is my honest opinion on it. But hey, that is what I'm into. That is what I believe. So look, the Westall 1966 story, I hope you enjoyed it. Please check it out if you want more information. And ding the notification bell and like and subscribe. That would be fantastic. Well, thank you very much and I'll see you on the next one.